Imagine a commander telling you your rifle is nothing more than a toy, especially when that rifle is your only hope to eliminate an invisible threat that has killed 14 of your comrades in just 72 hours. This is the heroic story of the man who single-handedly hunted 11 snipers at Guadalcanal with a hunting rifle, even though his enemies were better camouflaged, better equipped, and more experienced. This is the story of how an ordinary Illinois champion transformed into a legend in the middle of hell. Come, let's solve the mystery of the Winchester Model 70 and the silent honor placed upon the shoulders of Second Lieutenant John George. Today I will tell you not just a war story, but a story of how one man's individual discipline and faith in his humble rifle changed the fate of the Pacific War on a small front. This is less about a moment of conflict and more about a meaningful tale of human resilience and the heavy responsibility borne on one's shoulders. Our protagonist is Second Lieutenant John George. Our story takes place in January 1943 in the Point Cruz area of Guadalcanal, the island of hell in the Pacific. This was a place suffering not only from disease, but also from invisible Japanese snipers lurking in the shadows. In the last 72 hours, 14 American soldiers had lost their lives to the cold aim of these shadow hunters. The atmosphere was thick with tension and grief. Today, we will take a close look at every moment of that three-day duel, the silence in George's heart, and the brutal spirit of war. In the summer of 1942, on the massive chessboard of the Pacific War, the small island of Guadalcanal unexpectedly became the key point of the conflict. It possessed a critical air base that threatened the southern borders of the Japanese Empire and could cut off the routes to Australia. By seizing this island, America launched its first major ground offensive in the Pacific. Guadalcanal would later be called Green Hell by historians. The war was fought not just against the enemy, but against nature itself. Scorching, humid heat, monsoon rains, dense, impenetrable jungle, and malaria lurking in every corner. Many soldiers fell ill from disease, more often than from bullets. This geography made traditional combat impossible, turning individual skill and patience into the greatest weapons. At Point Cruz in early 1943, the nature of war became even more personal and insidious. The Japanese decided to take full advantage of the impenetrable green canopy. They built nests high in the tops of banyan trees, hidden among leaves and vines. These snipers were invisible. A shot would fire, an American soldier would fall, but the source of the fire could never be found. This caused deep psychological weariness in American units. The inability to see the enemy and the fact that every shadow held a threat drained the soldiers' nerves. In this environment of chaos and despair, our story's greatest contrast would emerge. Second Lieutenant John George. He didn't quite fit the typical definition of a war hero. He carried the calm, patient spirit of the Midwest. He saw the rifle not just as a weapon, but as a scientific instrument, a work of art. Before arriving at the front, George had dedicated a large part of his life to firearms. He was the Illinois state champion in long-range shooting, which required calculating wind speed, humidity, and even the vibration of the bullet leaving the barrel from 1,000 yards away. On paper, this might just be a title, but in practice, it meant thousands of calculations and split-second micro-adjustments happening in George's mind until the moment he pulled the trigger. He wasn't just a shooter, he was a precision engineer. George's entry into the army was quite ordinary. However, the skill he brought wasn't the only thing he carried. He also had with him the rifle he loved as much as his own life, purchased with 2 years of National Guard savings. This was an expression of a rare personal bond and dedication on the front line. Now let's focus on George's companion, that famous weapon, the Winchester Model 70. Everyone else held the M1 Garand, which was durable under harsh front-line conditions and could fire 8 rounds in succession. The Garand was an infantryman's security, fast, loud, and destructive. George's Model 70, however, represented an entirely different philosophy. Bolt action. Unlike the semi-automatic speed of the Garand, the Model 70 required George to pull the bolt manually after every shot. While this lowered the rate of fire, it forced the marksman to focus fully on every shot, questioning the why and how of firing. This was a philosophy of slowing down, accuracy. The bolt action mechanism eliminated the vibration caused by moving parts in semi-automatic systems, minimizing barrel vibration and recoil. This was the physical foundation that allowed George to achieve his 1,000-yard precision. On the battlefield, this meant every bullet reached exactly where it was aimed. Lyman Alaskan scope. The scope only had 2.5 times magnification, compared to the 10 times or 20 times magnification of modern sniper scopes. George's scope was almost an illusion. This showed that George didn't rely on optics, but on the naked eye, experience, and calculation. When George's rifle arrived via military mail with a fragile warning, the mockery among the others stemmed from a difference in understanding. They didn't realize that George was fighting not with an infantry rifle, but with a surgical tool. Captain Morris's sincere concern, asking George to leave this toy behind, increased the pressure, but George knew this rifle was a part of him. When the losses at Point Cruz became unbearable, Captain Morris remembered the possibility offered by the sporting rifle. George's response was the weight of all the mockery on his shoulders. "I'm ready to prove it, sir." George's mission was not just to hit the enemy, but to dispel the invisible fear surrounding the unit. Day 1. Evidence of the eye and the bullet. January 22, 1943, 9:17 a.m. George breathed the hot, heavy air of Guadalcanal among the damp remains of a bunker. Years of shooting discipline had isolated him from this chaos. He was no longer at the shooting range in Illinois. The targets he would hit were not made of cardboard. They were all alive. George's eyes scanned the massive shadow of a banyan tree, 240 yards away, 90 feet high. Where everyone else saw only leaves, George saw the flutter of a piece of cloth. This was a human error, a millimeter-scale flaw in the attempt to camouflage. Breath control, a gentle squeeze of the trigger. Fire, a silent, precise thud sound. The bullet traversed the 240-yard distance in less than 2 seconds. The sound of the falling Japanese soldier created a muffled echo in the jungle. First blood. George, keeping his calm, cycled the bolt. This man must have had a partner. 26 minutes later, a movement 60 yards away. The second sniper had seen his comrade fall and was trying to change his own position. George instantly calculated the speed of the moving target in his mind and boom. The second sniper fell as well. 2 shots, 2 snipers. The psychological pressure on the unit lightened a bit with every shot George took. By noon, thanks to his tactical discipline, George had neutralized 5 snipers. Day 2. Adaptation and Tactical Warfare, January 23, 1943. The Japanese were not fools. They realized their losses were not from ordinary infantry fire. They adapted to George. Now they were positioning themselves higher and further away. The war turned from an individual shooting duel into a tactical struggle between two intelligences. Immediately after George hit his 8th sniper, the enemy rained mortar fire on George's position. This was a sign that George's location was discovered. George, changing cover, disappeared like a ghost after every shot. He was no longer just a hunter, but also a master of survival. Day 3, the bait trap and the final clash, January 24, 1943. This was the peak of the conflict. When George saw the 10th sniper in a palm tree, his heart paused for a moment. Too easy, he thought. This was an intuition born of experience. The Japanese were using a clever bait to make George reveal his position with his fire. Respecting his opponent's intelligence, George accepted the trap but turned the rules in his favor. Bait first, George fired at the bait in the palm tree. The soldier's fall meant George's real position was exposed to the Japanese lines. Countershot, the bait fell. The real sniper, thinking the bait had worked, turned to look at George's old position. That was the moment. A split second of carelessness. George turned his rifle 90 degrees upward and hit the 11th sniper as well. 2 shots, 1 bait, 1 hunter. This was the victory of a game of wits. George immediately left his bunker and threw himself into a muddy puddle. Seconds later, machine gun fire literally mowed down the area he had just left. The final gasp. 5 bullets, 6 enemies. The story reached its climax as George made his last desperate move in the pit. A Japanese patrol was approaching to retrieve the dead snipers. George had only 5 bullets left in his Winchester. This was not a duel, but a struggle for survival. When a Japanese soldier saw George at the edge of the pit, it was too late. George sprang out of the wet mud and neutralized 3 soldiers with 3 successive shots. Instead of wrestling with the others, he used his tactical genius to put the last 2 bullets in his pocket and retreated like a ghost into the depths of the forest, back toward his own lines. After 3 days of solitary struggle, the mission was complete. George's success wasn't just about the destruction of 11 enemy soldiers. Most importantly, he had dispelled the negative atmosphere over the American units and provided a proven solution. George's toy rifle had single-handedly eliminated the greatest threat in the Pacific. Colonel Ferry ran to George. The mockery was over, replaced by deep respect. Ferry had only one request: for George to teach this skill, discipline, and patience to other soldiers. George accepted. The army gave George 14 idle Springfield rifles. George gathered 40 volunteer marksmen and taught them not just how to aim, but George's philosophy, patience and invisibility, trusting the eyes, not just the scope, being able to wait an hour or even a day before taking a shot, precision over speed, focusing on lethal accuracy instead of rapid fire, reading the enemy's mind, foreseeing the opponent's move and trap. When this new sniper unit began operations in early February, the results were incredible. 74 confirmed enemy soldiers killed in 12 days, and most importantly, 0 friendly losses. John George had become the founder of a legend. In the continuing days of the war, George was shot in the shoulder by a Japanese sniper at Guadalcanal and evacuated. But George's spirit refused to stay away from the front. After recovering, he volunteered for one of the most dangerous and secret missions in the Pacific, the Burma Front. What did he have with him? Of course, his faithful companion, the Winchester Model 70, carefully packed in its waterproof chest. Here he joined the unit that would infiltrate behind Japanese lines and go down in history as the legendary Merrill's Marauders. George had taken not just a military unit, but a philosophy of war with him. In the impenetrable jungles of Burma, the silent discipline and hunter's wit that George established at Guadalcanal would play a critical role in the Marauders' survival and success. He carried not just a rifle, but a hope. John George's story shows us that talent lies beyond appearance or the shallow judgments of others. He arrived with a sporting rifle and eliminated the war's deadliest threat. He was not just a marksman, he was a timeless example of how discipline, honor, and personal mastery can be guiding lights in the chaos of war. He performed the brutal duty required by war with the greatest respect and flawless precision. Today, we took a close look at Second Lieutenant John George's three-day solitary struggle. He didn't just come with a hunting rifle, he brought years of patience, training, and personal honor. Ultimately, this personal discipline overcame institutional skepticism and turned into a training system that saved hundreds of soldiers' lives. This story is told with respect to the memory of all those who lost their lives in conflict and those who served on the front. So, what do you think about John George's incredible perseverance and that faithful Winchester Model 70? Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments and keep George's legacy alive. If you liked this in-depth narrative and the effort put into it, please leave a like on the video, subscribe to my channel, and turn on the bell so you don't miss such forgotten and inspiring stories of heroism. To not miss the next story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Stay well.